Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of Personable. Today I'm hugely honoured to have Tim Henman. Tim is a former number one in Britain for tennis, as well as being a career high of number four in the world on multiple occasions. He's reached the semi-final of 6 majors, winning 15 ATP titles, 11 in singles and 4 in doubles. He is a commentator. He's won an Olympic silver medal. He has a hill named after him at Wimbledon. He's an OBE and he's also the founder of the Tim Henman Foundation. So thank you so much for joining me today, Tim.
Pleasure, Harvey. Good to see you again.
So, Tim, you've had a hugely successful career, but I wanted to initially start by going to how it started. So, at what point in your childhood did you realize, and why tennis? You're pretty good at quite a few sports. Why did you pursue tennis, and how did you know that you were good enough to actually go into something like tennis?
Well, first things first, I was brought up with, 2 older brothers. We lived in a small village outside Oxford, and my mum and dad both played, different sports to a pretty decent level. And so, that was my environment growing up. My brothers were 4 and 5 years older than me. I went to the same school, but after school, it was all about, playing sport, whether that was rugby, football, cricket, hockey, squash, golf or tennis. Probably from the age of 3, I always played a lot of sport and I always enjoyed it. I started playing tennis when I was 3, and then I think one of the defining moments for me was when my mum took me to Wimbledon the first time when I was 6, and that was on the first Monday in 1981, and I was lucky enough to see Bjorn Borg play. We had a couple of tickets on centre court, and I think when I saw, Borg walk onto centre court, and he was, 5 times champion, I think that was kind of when I made my one and only career decision that, I really wanted to, follow in Borg's footsteps. I wanted to play at Wimbledon. I wanted to play on centre court, but so I knew, bizarrely, very, very young, that tennis was what I wanted to pursue. But I did keep playing other sports, and I think that was important. That I really loved all different elements of playing in team sports. I enjoyed, as I said, rugby, football, cricket until I was probably 12 or 13. But I always knew deep down that tennis was what I wanted to pursue. It was what I was best at. And then, when I was about 11, that was when, I sort of made, with the support of my parents, a big decision to kind of leave home and to go to school in London as part of the David Lloyd Academy. David Lloyd was setting up a tennis academy in his new indoor facilities that he was building. So I moved to go to Reed School, and that was where I started to really up the ante in terms of my tennis. We would play, instead of really playing the school sports, after school we were collected and then went to play 2 hours tennis, sort of half an hour's fitness training, and then, come back to school. So that was, I think those early years of being exposed to lots of sports, loving all sports, but, really falling in love with tennis at such a young age, and then getting that opportunity. Those were, really important, moments for me.
Did you always think you were special, or at least had what it takes? Because a lot of young kids, they see football players and they're like, I want to be a football player. And there's so many kids that probably wanted to be tennis players as well that didn't make it. Could you tell that, hey, like, I'm a lot better than these people, or at least I've got the mindset to be better than these people? Did you notice a difference in yourself, or do you think you had the same and you were just naturally better or more hardworking?
No, I think there's a massive unknown out there, and I think the important element for me was how much I enjoyed it. It never felt like it was a chore. And was I good? Yeah, I think I probably played in my first tournaments when I was 6 or 7, and then I played in a it was a softball tournament. It was with sponge balls when I was under 8, and I won my county event, I won my regional event, and then I got through to the national event and got through to the final of the nationals. And so, I think I must have had an underlying belief that I was decent. And then when I played in national championships under 12, I lost in the final. So yes, I knew I was was decent. But I think one of the challenges is with tennis is a global game. It's played throughout the world, and when I was growing up, certainly, British tennis was no hotbed of talent. So to be exposed to the game externally, i.e., outside of Great Britain, to get into European tournaments, I think that is massively important, because you want to understand, if it's something that you are going to pursue, you've got to understand where the bar is, what the levels are. And so, one of my first trips, I went to Holland when I was 11, played in some tournaments over there and did okay. And then my first sort of high level trip was when I was about 15, and we went to play a series of tournaments in Italy, in Belgium, and then we played French. Then we played, no, that was a later trip, but sort of 4 or 5 weeks on the continent playing on clay. And I think that was a bit of an eye opener. I was a late developer physically, so I was still a little bit small. I didn't really have the physical strength, and my results, weren't particularly good. However, it didn't deter me. I think, if anything, it just made me more determined. It made me appreciate the areas of my game that I needed to work on. And and I think you mentioned it. It's a journey, and I think that is very important for young people to understand, not just in sport but in life. Everybody's journey is different, and there will be challenges along the way. There'll be bumps in the road, and there'll be steep learning curves. But if you can embrace those challenges and keep learning all the time, then I think whatever you're doing, you'll come out better, stronger, wiser, more knowledgeable, with more experience, and that can only be a good thing. And that was no different to my tennis.
Well, speaking of that, and you playing in Europe, and it almost sounds like, although although it's incredibly hard you're going like that, but you had quite a serious injury when you were younger, which you've spoken about on quite a few occasions, of which one would usually expect maybe midway in their career, and they've had this massive, oh no, I've had this injury, let me get back from this. But this was when you were a teenager, before you've even made it. So what made you then, and how did you convince your parents and yourself, I've had this really serious injury, what can I do to get better and, go back to tennis?
Yeah, I mean, it was it was just when I started the David Lloyd Academy. I actually had 2 serious injuries, one when I was 11, one when I was 19, or just 20. And so basically it was an elbow injury, and it was really because I was playing a lot of tennis. My bones were still developing, and basically the muscles pulled a little piece of bone away from the main bone in my elbow, and it was actually an injury that you don't really see a great deal in this country, but you see it a lot more in America, with the young baseball players, the pitchers, when they're throwing. And so, it took quite a long time to diagnose, but the reality was that I wasn't allowed to play tennis for 6 months. Having just started on a tennis academy was, massively disappointing and frustrating. But, so I ended up just doing 2 hours fitness training every day for 6 months, while my friends who were part of the academy were playing tennis, and it was very difficult to stomach. But I think, again, it just highlighted my hunger and desire to keep working hard and doing the right things to get back fit and healthy. And I think that mental fortitude and the resilience was something that I always had from a young age, and it didn't sort of deter me. It didn't sort of sidetrack me from wanting to be a professional tennis player. And fast forward, I then, when I was 16, I did my GCSEs, and I sort of convinced my parents that I should leave school and play full-time tennis. And I think I was slightly fortunate that my dad was a slightly frustrated sportsman. He was a good athlete, and I think when he left school at 18 after doing his A-levels, I think he kind of wishes that he had played a sport for a year or two just to see where it could have taken him. But his father, my grandfather, was senior partner in the family law firm, and I think his conservative approach was, well, you should go into the city and get a real job. And so that's what my dad did. He became a lawyer and then became senior partner. So I think when I was 16 and saying to my mum and dad, look, I really think I can play full-time tennis, I think my dad reflected and said to himself and then said to me, well, you can always go back to education. You can never go back to being a 16-year-old, wishing to learn their trade, that sort of apprenticeship. So I was fortunate that they gave me, massive support. And, then I went off on my, journey to become a professional tennis player. And then just sort of fast forward a few years, I then grew when I was about 17. I got fitter and stronger and, I was taller and had a, better reach on the court. And then my results really started to pick up. And I was 20, just turned 20, and I'd broken the top 150 in the world. And I was playing a tournament in Singapore, and I didn't know at the time, but I pushed off to go to the net and I fractured the bottom of my tibia. So I basically broke my leg in 3 places. And, I was, again, I was 146 in the world. I was, had huge momentum. I was really improving. And then suddenly I was out of the game for 5 months, and, my ranking then dropped outside 300. And again, that was my journey, and, having to deal with that, having to, have a pretty significant operation to have 3 pins in my leg, and which I've still got today. You've got to deal with it. You've got to pick yourself up and deal with the frustration and disappointment. But I think that therefore, shapes your character, your resilience of, how you deal with these things.
It sounds like you had an amazing, your mental game was incredible, and you had this sort of single-mindedness that you were always going back to tennis. But for a young player in today's day and age, do you still think it's important to leave school at around 16 or 18 to pursue tennis if that's what you want? And then also, how do you draw the line between those that should actually pursue tennis and those that shouldn't?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So certainly, when I left school, I was 16, sort of, 1990, that's 30 years ago. I think the game has changed significantly. And I think the physicality has changed, and therefore players are taking longer to develop. And so therefore staying in education, combining tennis, I think is a great option. And I know that you're off to Duke University, and I think the American college system is really providing some brilliant opportunities for tennis players now, because you can continue your education, but you still can, have the opportunity of lots of tennis, great facilities, great coaching, and most importantly, a lot of match play, because I think that's where you learn the most about yourself. So I think that time frame has changed. When I was growing up, it was so important to get out onto the sort of circuit and learn your trade. Whereas now, you can definitely bide your time, keep your options open, and that question around who's good enough, who's not, no one knows. I think a lot of people at 16, 17, when I was 16 or 17, would have said, he's not going to be good enough, and everyone's entitled to their opinion, but it's interesting why did I have enormous self-belief? Why did I have that hunger and desire to make it happen? And I'm not saying my 2 brothers don't have hunger and desire, but they were brought up in the same house, with the same parents, with the same values, with the same opportunities. But for whatever reason, there was something that triggered in my brain that tennis was what I wanted to do. And my brothers are both very good all-round sportsmen, but they didn't want to pursue sport. And I sometimes ask myself that question, but I think it also slightly comes back to the point that I've always said, I've never had a real job. It's always been a hobby, and even with what I do now, I'm on the board at Wimbledon. I'm involved in, television around tennis. I still work with HSBC, Jaguar, Rolex, and Vodafone. Those are the 4 brands that I'm an ambassador with. They're all linked to Wimbledon. So I feel very lucky that, all elements, and add in my foundation, which I've done a lot more with. All my, work elements are passions of mine, and I feel very lucky and fortunate that that's the case.
Did you ever imagine that you would become an Olympian? Was that ever
No, I
something
mean,
you
that's
imagined?
again, it's another really interesting aspect that, when I was growing up, I was a massive sports fan and I loved watching the Olympics, but, tennis really wasn't a part of. It was a test event in '84 in LA. It became a recognized event in '88 in Seoul. Having said that, not a massive amount of the top players played. And so, it was a little bit of a sort of sideshow. I didn't necessarily think that, tennis belonged in the Olympics. I very much was more along the lines of, the Olympics should be the pinnacle of your sport. And
Sure.
it wasn't the pinnacle of tennis. And some, would debate that it still isn't. Having said that, when you look at, now all the best players, the top players in tennis compete in the Olympics, I think on both the men's and the women's side, we've had so many amazing medalists. For me to go to Atlanta in '96, I would say that I was just as interested in watching, as many other events as I could as competing
Sure.
in the tennis itself. But once I got there, I would say the three opening ceremonies that I participated in, Atlanta, Sydney, and Athens, were three of the best things I ever did in sport. The atmosphere, to feel part of that enormous British team, to be wearing the uniform, if you like, to have that Union Jack and the tracksuit wherever you were, was incredibly special. And now, to have an Olympic silver medal, and I think the more tennis has grown in the Olympics, I think the more special and the more proud I am of that accomplishment. And when I talk to my kids about tennis and they're aware of what I've done, I think there are very few things that they are sort of that impressed with, and I think that's human nature. I'm their dad. I'm not going to impress them very often, but I think Olympic medal is definitely one of them.
Do you think because that was quite early in your career, do you think that spurred you on to, you've just won a medal at one of what didn't seem like one of the most amazing things in the world, but I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Do you think that then motivated you and spurred you on to your later success?
No, I don't think so. I just think that, that was, what was I? I was 21 at the time, as you say. Yeah, I'd broken through a little bit later on the tour, and it just again was it was a big accomplishment for me, and I think perhaps gave me more confidence, more belief to go out there and try and beat the best players and win the biggest tournaments. And so, I think it was just another, piece of the puzzle, piece of my journey that was coming together. And I look back on those, whatever it was, 10 days in Atlanta, and, going through the draw in the doubles, and playing in that gold medal match was, I mean, we sort of got killed in the final by the Woodies, who were, one of the best doubles teams of all time. But, to have won, was it 5 matches in '96, which was, a really sort of lean medal haul for the British team. To be there in that gold medal match was very special. Disappointing to lose, but to come away with silver was an amazing memory.
So following that, you then went on a bit of a run of, I mean, at least looking at it in hindsight, it looks like you won quite a lot of tournaments. What do you think the key to success and winning in tennis is, and how do you deal with that consistency? Because when I'm playing, I'm not a good tennis player for anyone listening, but when I'm playing, you get on a bit of a spur and you're feeling good about yourself. But with something like tennis, you're bound to make a lot of mistakes, but it's keeping going. So how do you deal with all those things in your head and actually go and win tournaments?
Yeah, I think the psychology behind it is really interesting, and it's part of a very steep learning curve. And I think that's where my environment was changing rapidly. It was 1 minute that I was playing the lowest level of the professional game in India, on a shoestring budget, earning very little prize money, to then sort of breaking through to the challenger, to the main tour, to playing in the Olympics, and then suddenly being in the second week of Grand Slams. It was, it's tough to sort of get your head round, but it's such an exciting journey when you're playing in the biggest and best tournaments. When you reflect on, again, I use that word journey. It was, a couple of minutes ago, we were talking about me being a 6-year-old at Wimbledon, watching Bjorn Borg play, and then 15 years later, I'm on centre court competing at Wimbledon. So, it's a steep learning curve, and I think being able to deal with that, there are physical aspects, staying injury free, improving your game. There are tennis aspects, getting better and understanding your opponents, but also the mental side of things. And there are some key words, I think, 3 that have always sort of sprung to mind are confidence is one of them. I think it's a very interesting word. I think pressure, again, is an interesting subject, and success. I think we're so much more aware of the mental sides of life and sport, and our mental health and well-being is so important. And so, if I were to say to a lot of young athletes or young tennis players, we hear lots of people talking about confidence. What is it? And, in my mind, confidence is the sum of your thoughts. It's your thoughts added together, but that can obviously goes both ways. And so, if I'm a golf addict, and if I stand over a 4-foot putt, and I can easily stand there and say, well, I've missed the last 3 to the left, and I missed, the one previous to the right, and there's a good chance I'm going to miss this next one. I'm adding together a lot of negative thoughts, and
Sure.
so, to be able to, to control your mind and really think in a correct fashion, to build confidence is so important. And I think that's an area in life and in sport that is massively important. And so for me, going back to playing tennis at the highest level, to have that confidence and the people around you to continue to instill the self-belief to compete and play at the highest level is hugely important.
Do you have any techniques or anything that you would use, or mental strategies? Because even if you have double faulted twice or something, there's a lot of expectation when you're playing. So what would you actually tell yourself? Because I don't know, it's never been in your mind, but it might be a random thought telling you you're going to miss this shot. So what do you tell yourself? You're like, no, I am going to make it, or
yeah, I mean, the reality of sports psychology, and the most basic element, but is not easy to do, is staying in the present.
Sure.
So staying in the present is really about just playing in tennis the next point to the best of your ability. And what's happened previously, you cannot change it. So you mentioned, a couple of double faults. Well, that's unfortunate, but you can't change it. So why worry about it? Why dwell on it?
Sure.
You've got to be focused on the next point, the next shot. If it's in golf, if it's the drive off the tee, concentrate on that shot. Once you've hit it, you can't change it. And so, having that clarity of thought is very easy in principle. But when you're playing on centre court at Wimbledon in front of 15,000 people, and X million people watching on television, it's easy to become distracted. And so to have that the clarity of thought, just to be in that moment. And I think, again, a sort of a phrase that I used and related to a lot at Wimbledon was control the controllables. And so for me, really, the only 2 things that I could control were my preparation and my performance. Everything else around what was being said in the media, written in the newspapers. I mean, it was different. We didn't have social media, but I think our press sort of contingent was a lot bigger. What was being said on television and on the radio, I couldn't control it. So why was I, going to worry about it? And I was good at that. I didn't worry about it. I wasn't distracted. I just wanted to, focus on going out there, preparing well, competing, giving 100% to, each and every point, each and every shot. And what will be, and that's pretty simplistic, but it certainly was. It was a big part of why I played, my best tennis at Wimbledon.
I think you've kind of answered my question already, because I was going to bring on to the next point about, you coming to Wimbledon and getting to the semi-final, reaching incredibly high at the tournament and consistently being able to do that. And a lot of the public, we were talking before about you either win or you don't win. But sort of we were talking about how the key to success, it's not, well, I'll let you talk about it. But basically my question was literally just what you answered, was what kept you going and how did you keep consistently doing so well in major tournaments, not being faltered and, consistently being, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, I think so. You go back to, I think the crux of your point, what is success? And to me, success is about maximizing your potential. And so, when I reflect on my journey, if you'd have said to me at 19, 18, 19, if you sign on the dotted line here, you can be in the top 100 tennis players in the world for the next 10 years. You can play in the Grand Slams. You can play on the main tour. You can earn a living playing professional tennis. I would have signed in a heartbeat. So then, when I'm 19 and I break into the top 100, I think to myself, wow, this is good. This is exciting. But now I'm top 100. I'd like to be top 50. And so then, I break the top 50 and I think, wow, this is good. This is exciting. I'd quite like to be top 30. And I break top 30. I break top 20. I break the top 10. I break the top 5. I get to 4. And so, if you wind the clock back and you're saying, well, I would have signed being top 100, I would have been delighted. I would have been thrilled with that. And so then if you think about being the 4th best player, on the planet, and, I won 11 titles on tour. I made 6 Grand Slam semi-finals. I was Olympic silver medalist. That was as good as I was meant to be. I gave 100% to everything, to my tournaments, my training, my travel, my diet, my injury prevention. That was as good as I was meant to be. So if then people say, oh, well, you didn't win Wimbledon, it's like, well, no, I didn't win Wimbledon. And, I would have loved to have won Wimbledon. It was my dream, my ambition. I think I was good enough to win Wimbledon, but there were people that were better than me. I don't think you can reach 6 Grand Slam semi-finals and say, well, you weren't good enough to win a Grand Slam. I think I was good enough. But, on those given days, losing to Sampras a couple of times in the semis of Wimbledon, I lost to Federer in the semis of the US Open. They were better than me. I beat them. I beat Sampras in Cincinnati. I beat Federer 6 times. But on those given days, they were better than me. So I
Does that make you the greatest of all time?
Sorry?
Beating Federer, does that make you the greatest of all time?
No, it doesn't make me the greatest of all time. Certainly not. But it's
an eternal flex. That's an eternal.
It's a good.
You can forever say that.
It's a good win to have on your CV or a few wins. But going back to the original point, around success, I think it's very easy to quantify success in sport just by winning and losing. And I don't think, over a career, it's that simple. And so, when I look back at my career, I have, lots of disappointments, but no regrets, because I gave it everything I had. So, I think that's why when I decided to retire, I was 33. My game was a little sort of stagnating a little bit. I had a few injury issues. I very much felt that I'd always been traveling around the world trying to win tournaments. And I felt just at that moment, was I here sort of making up the numbers? Was I trying to win a couple of matches or get to the second week of a slam? And that's why it was very clear cut. And it was very straightforward for me to stop playing professional tennis. We were just about to have our 3rd child, and I was 33. It was absolutely the right time. And so, I don't miss tennis. I don't miss professional tennis playing in any way, shape, or form. And to me, I feel very fortunate. I feel very lucky that I was able to, to stop at absolutely the right time for me.
Well, How many winners have a hill named after them at Wimbledon? I don't know I don't know any. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, exactly. It's always been my hill, and I'll make sure that it stays that way.
Well, there are a lot of winners, but yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I think that's the greatest compliment. In fact, I don't know if there's a Djokovic Hill or.
No. It's Henman Hill. Even, I mean, there was a bit of a debate at some stage whether it might become, Murray Mound. But they asked. I remember it was about 4 or 5 years ago, and they did an interview with Andy, and he was sort of asked a series of sort of simple questions, and it was whether he prefers tea or coffee, whether he likes early mornings or late nights, or whatever it may be. And the final question was, Murray Mound or Henman Hill, and he said, quite rightly, he said, no, you can't change its name. It's
amazing.
It's always been Henman Hill, and long may that continue.
That's amazing. So when you retired, was it always a thing that you wanted to stay in and around tennis, commentating, being in the sport, or did you ever think maybe go into corporate life or something else at that point?
I always knew that tennis has always been a massive passion of mine, and it still is. But I just don't need to play tennis. I stopped in 2007, and then in 2008 I was asked to join the board at Wimbledon. So our board are the leaders of the club and the championships, and then we have a big executive team, and they go and really do the work around the direction that we give them. And so, go back to, me first going to Wimbledon when I was 6, also add into the equation, my grandparents both played at Wimbledon and my great-grandmother played at Wimbledon. So,
Wow.
The club and the championships have really been in my family for, over 100 years. So, still to be involved. I've been on the board for 15 years, and I really enjoy that element of it, and seeing how the club and the championships have evolved so much, but have still maintained, that history and tradition. We often talk about history, tradition, and innovation at Wimbledon, and it's very special to be a part of. So, I love that element. I enjoy very much the television work that I do around the sport, and working at the 4 Grand Slams. They are the cornerstones of the sport. That's where the best and the best players, men and women, competing. So, that very much keeps me up to date with what's going on. And then, as I said, still been involved with those partners that are involved and have supported me. HSBC, I've worked with them for nearly 29 years. A lot of my junior tournaments growing up were Midland Bank events. Midland Bank sponsored me at Wimbledon, and then that became part of HSBC. So I'm very fortunate to have those relationships. And as I said, then, with the work around my foundation, I found that very, rewarding to try and give back to some of those less fortunate.
Sure. I want to get onto your foundation, but just before talking about Wimbledon and the future of tennis, when you've got such an amazing tournament like Wimbledon, and you're now on the board of it, you're literally one of the biggest tennis tournaments on the entire planet. So you're thinking about the overall sport of tennis. So when you're making those key decisions, what key metrics are you looking for? Are you looking for, is it monetary based? Is it fan experience based? Is it player based? Is it trying to grow the sport of tennis?
Yeah.
Are you trying to compete with other sports? And where do you see the future of tennis, both as a sport and also in Britain especially?
Yeah, so Wimbledon, I would say Wimbledon's mission, if that's the right word, is to be certainly the best tennis tournament in the world. To be the best one of the best annual sporting events in the world, and go back to that tennis element. the best tennis tournament in the world and held on grass. Grass is very much
Sure.
an important part of the DNA. When you look at those metrics, I think you're looking first and foremost, the player experience. We want the players to come away believing that this is the best tennis tournament in the world. We're certainly looking at our, fan experience and looking at the audience numbers, whether that's our ground capacity, whether it's our television audience, and certainly, the financial side of it's important because the profit of Wimbledon goes to the LTA for the benefit of British tennis. So that's very important nationally, but obviously the health of the sport internationally is massively important, because if the game isn't growing, if the game's not popular, then we're not going to hit those targets. So certainly, I think Wimbledon feels like it's an important custodian of the sport. We're looking, long term. We've got a lot of exciting opportunities going forward. So it's an amazing thing to be a part of, when you also consider that it is fundamentally just a tennis club that has a tennis tournament. But its brand, its values are hugely important, and need to be sort of nurtured and cherished.
What do you think makes Wimbledon so special? And if you had to change one thing about it, what would it be and why?
So I think what makes it so special are, as I mentioned just a little bit earlier, it's history, tradition, but there is enormous innovation. And,
Sure.
When you talk about the strength of a brand, I think, the Wimbledon brand is right up there with any brand globally, because it's, it's very sort of well protected. But when you think about its DNA, it's, I would say it's grass courts, it's predominantly white clothing, it's the centre court, it's the raw box, it's the real, it's that almost lack of branding on the court that makes the branding so strong. So it's that sort of clear canvas, but also as well, I think the club and the championships is not scared to innovate. So an example of that would have been, if you'd have said to me 20 years ago, in 20 years' time, you're going to have sliding roofs on both centre court and court one, I don't think many people would have believed you. But when you look at that that investment and the sort of technology behind that, it's huge additions that guarantee play for 27,000 spectators, on two courts for the players, and obviously for a global television audience. It's added massive value with the expansion across the road, with the golf course. There's hugely exciting opportunities that really have to be managed extremely carefully, but you're then sort of future proofing the next 30, 50, 100 years of the club and the tournament.
I hate to ask this question, but I feel like I almost have to. Because you were disqualified, was it Wimbledon? About nearly 20 years ago. Would you have disqualified yourself if you were in charge?
Yeah. It was very, there was some sort of, in hindsight, some funny elements around it. I was playing doubles. I should hasten to add that we were 2-1 up. We were in the 4-set tiebreak, so we were very close to winning. So it wasn't as if I was, throwing a massive tantrum and, my toys were coming out of the pram, as it were. But having said that, our opponents hit two very sort of fortunate shots in the tiebreak. And I, turned away because it was their serve. And so I sort of turned away to hit the balls down the other end of the court. And just as I hit the balls, the ball girl was the other side of the net, and she sort of popped her head up to run across.
Yeah.
And I hit her in the side of the head. And so you've got to be responsible for your actions on the court. And I hit the ball away, wasn't really looking where I was hitting it. And if you hit someone on the court, then, there's a fairly good chance you're going to be disqualified. So it was a massive shock to the system. You know, I was 20. I was 20 at that time, and I was the first person in 120 years to be disqualified at Wimbledon. So I remember that the next day I was sharing a flat with Andrew Richardson, who was best man at my wedding, who was a player at the time, and he went out and bought a lot of the newspapers. And I remember reading the back page of the Sun. The headline was, "He hit it so hard it could have killed her," and that was a quote from one of our opponents that day. And I remember reading, thinking, you know, that is just completely untrue. You know, it's just a massive
Nonsense.
exaggeration. But, you know, again, it goes back to that element of controlling the controllables. I couldn't control what was being written in the newspapers. And pretty much from that day on, certainly when I was a professional tennis player, I never read the newspaper. I could probably count on, you know, two hands how many articles I read about tennis or really about anything, you know, for the rest of my career, because I knew, you know, they weren't opinions that I was interested in. They weren't opinions that I could control.
It's awful. Yeah.
So why would I bother reading them? So I and that definitely helped me, you know, when there are plenty of distractions, you know, out there, certainly when I was playing at Wimbledon, to not read the newspapers, was hugely beneficial to me.
It's insane. I was going to ask you about a few specific players I had in mind, but I'd be interested in your overarching view of tennis, with specifically looking at players like Emma Raducanu, Novak Djokovic, and Carlos Alcaraz.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of got both Emma Raducanu and Carlos coming through, and then Djokovic, who's a lot older. I'd be interested in your overarching view on those three players specifically, as well as other people, on where you see the sport going, what you think they'll do in the next few years.
Yeah. So I think Alcaraz and Raducanu are really great examples of incredible tennis players. Excuse me, but very, very different journeys. And this is this word journey keeps coming up, and I just think it's so important. So I think with Alcaraz, he's had an extremely sort of well planned, well mapped out, meteoric rise, but there's been the opportunity for the foundation to be built from a young age. And he's been working with Juan Carlos Ferrero for sort of 5 years, and he's been at that tennis academy. He's been able to work on all areas of his game. He's been then able to work on his fitness and his strength and the physicality and the mindset, and all those pieces of the puzzle have been put together to then play in the futures, challengers,
Sure.
onto the main tour, and now to go through to win big tournaments, to win Grand Slams, and to become world number one. And that's his journey, and it's been amazing. However, when you look at Raducanu's journey, of sitting her A levels in lockdown, having no real opportunity to be training, physically or technically, and then, on the back of no sort of training blocks, just to go into Wimbledon. I forget which year it was. It must have been 2020, I guess. At the beginning of lockdown.
The year's open was 2021, wasn't it?
2021, sorry, yes. So it was, to go into Wimbledon 2021 with no form, with no tournaments, with no training, and then, to play as well as she did, to make the fourth round, and then, get her ranking up into sort of top 200, and then go on her first real sort of professional trip to America, and to play 4 tournaments, and then, turn up at qualifying. When you think about professional tennis, Grand Slam tennis in the Open era, no one's ever qualified and made the final of a Grand Slam. And you think about all the greats of the game, whether that's, Venus and Serena Williams, Martina Navratilova, Billie Jean King, Chris Evert, Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Sampras, Agassi, McEnroe, no one's ever qualified and made the final of a slam. And, Raducanu qualified and won the thing. And it was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen in professional tennis. However, there was no base. There was this incredible natural athlete, somebody so mentally resilient, who was such a great tennis player, but there was no foundation. And so, she then wins the US Open, but it's doing it all back to front. So then for her to try and, put that foundation in place has been very, very hard. And because suddenly her schedule is dictated by the fact that she's getting into the biggest tournaments. And, she was so raw and still is so raw and learning her trade. She's kind of having to do it back to front. And then she's been unlucky with different injuries, but I still don't have any doubts that, Raducanu will get back to the top of the game. I just think it's important that, she first and foremost remains patient, and, also, people around her remain patient, and certainly, she needs to, get the right team around her, whether that's a tennis coach, a physio, or a fitness trainer, and then just build. Because
sorry, before you talk about the other players, I'd be interested because quite a few things I read about you was saying there was a lot of expectation over you. And someone like Emma Raducanu that suddenly won the US Open, there's a huge amount of expectation on her for the rest of her career. And if she doesn't even get close again, people will view her as a failure, because that's just the way people look at it. So how did you deal with expectation to keep, doing so well in tennis? And what advice would you have for Emma Raducanu moving forward with these injuries, having won the US Open, then building that foundation?
I think that, expectations were very different. I was a late developer. I was sort of, breaking into the top 100 when I was 19 or 20. And yes, the expectations increased when I started to do better at Wimbledon, being a British player, playing as, a home player in the biggest and best tournament. Whereas, her levels of expectation externally have been crazy. And that goes back to what I said earlier on. She can't control that. She should not be influenced in any way by, what's been said and, talked about in the newspapers, because you can't control it. So it does, so it's a good question, isn't it? What is success for Raducanu now? It's ludicrous that, I never won a Grand Slam, but she's won a Grand Slam. And now you're saying, people are saying, if she doesn't win another Grand Slam, she's a failure. I mean, it's just ludicrous.
Exactly,
She's got to get fit and healthy, and fingers crossed she can do that. And then, she's got to work hard and, look to improve all aspects of her game. And then in 10 years' time, if she's done that, she'll be able to look back and say, I did X, Y, and Z and A, B, and C, and that was as good as my career could be. But that cannot happen unless she's fit and healthy, and that's where it's so important that she, she's patient, and if she gets fit and healthy and strong, then she'll be able to do herself justice. If she's trying to play the professional game when she's not healthy, she won't do herself justice. She won't be able to compete against the best players, because the challenge is tough enough when you're healthy.
Yeah, sort of as someone that's not reached even close to what either of you have achieved, but sort of reiterating that, it sort of seems that people look at the output without all the preparation beforehand, where in most of it, I think I've read a quote from you before that practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent, which I think is a really nice quote. And what I've got out of this interview from you is that it's all about building this foundation, and it's all about reaching your max potential. And if your max potential means you don't win anything, that's your potential. There's nothing you can do about it. But it seems that you should always try your best and control the controllables, which I think is a really key lesson for both me and
it is, listening. And that's where you know, for you, Harvey, or any individual, even if you knew, I don't know if you know what you want to do, but let's say, let's say you're going to play sport, you're going to be a golfer. You don't know what your potential is. Could
Sure.
you be number one in the world? Maybe. Could you win a major championship? Maybe, but you don't know. You don't know, your family don't know, I don't know, your coach doesn't know. But what you've got to do is find out. And the way that
Sure.
you find out is by giving 100% in all those different areas. And that's what I was lucky enough to be told by my parents growing up. Whatever you're doing, try your best, give 100%. You can't do more than that, whether it's exams, whether it's schoolwork, whether it's sport, or try your best. And it's not always easy to do. There are plenty of days where we all get up out of bed and you don't necessarily feel like doing it, but those are the days, I think, that define you as a person. They will bring out that character, and that's what you want. And so when you go back to Alcaraz has won 2 majors. He's been world number one. I mean, that's incredible. But is that it? I don't think so. And so, he wants to find out what his potential is. It's how many majors can he win? And so, as long as he still has that hunger and desire and motivation, he's going to keep working hard. And I think I'll give you an example at the other end of the spectrum. So when I look back at British tennis over the last 20, 30 years, my biggest gripe is that we've had too many players that haven't maximized their potential. And when I say haven't maximized their potential, there've been, enough players with natural ability as good tennis players, the technical side of things, that haven't had that work ethic, that hunger and desire
Sure.
to be better athletes, to compete harder, who therefore haven't maximized their potential. And that's, there will be players that look back at the end of their career with regrets, saying, God, I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd applied myself better. I wish I'd worked harder here. And that's no fun, because we only get one opportunity. This life's not a dress rehearsal. You get one shot at it. And when you are, whether you're 10 or 12 or 18 or 19, you only get one chance at those different stages in life. And I think it's important that we grasp them. Go out there and be ambitious. Set your goals high and give it your best shot. And then you'll look back with no regrets, no disappointments, that you gave it your best shot.
It's amazing. I kind of cut you off because I wanted to come back to it a bit later on, but you started a foundation. I'd love if you could talk a bit about that, where the inspiration came from, and what's going on with it at the moment.
Yeah. So when I was lucky enough to get the tennis scholarship, which was sort of funded by Jim Slater, who was a financier in the city, and David Lloyd. When David Lloyd was starting his first tennis club, was indoor tennis centre, was at Heston, right by Heathrow Airport, and then his second one was at Rains Park. He was living in Oxshott, and therefore the school that we were sort of chosen to attend was Reed School in Cobham. And when I was there, I was aware. I felt sort of very lucky that I was given this opportunity in tennis, but I was also aware that I was getting a free education because I was good at tennis, and I was then became even more aware of Reed School and what that was about. And Reed School was set up now about 205 years ago by Andrew Reed, and it was an orphanage. And so it was providing an opportunity for children that had lost a parent or both parents. And for 200 years ago, that really sort of struck a chord, that here was someone who really wanted to provide opportunity for those less fortunate. And I always, in the back of my mind, thought, wow, if I get the opportunity to be able to support in some area, education is always going to be, high on that list. But I've always been passionate about sport, and those, really have been the cornerstones of the foundation, providing it opportunities in education and sport for those less fortunate. And again, through the challenges we've had in the last, for 3 or 4 years around COVID, and there are so many people out there that need a little bit of help, need those opportunities. As I said, we only get one chance at that. So, the foundation has been, very rewarding and inspiring and motivating to, do that extra bit. I'm lucky, as I said. I've talked a lot about opportunity. My parents gave me opportunity. David Lloyd and Jim Slater gave me opportunity. Tennis has given me incredible opportunities, and so to be able to, give a little bit back and support those less fortunate, I think has been something I've enjoyed, and something that I hope to continue for many years to come.
I've got one final question, and that is, what's next for you? What are we going to be seeing you doing in the next 20, 30,
Yeah,
50,
it's a good
1,000
question.
years?
I was asked a couple of years ago. I can't remember who asked me, and they said, "What's your ambition?" And I thought, wow, that's a really thought-provoking question, because having grown up, always being sort of highly motivated and always working towards goals. We touched on it, trying to be in the top 100 in the world and top 50, and win this tournament, that tournament, and improve here and physically, whatever it may be. In sort of post tennis career, I think it's a little bit less specific, which I'm very happy with. And I actually came away and I said, well, if I could have the next 10 years almost the same as the previous 10 years, and my family are happy and healthy, and I'm involved in all those things, around the game, around Wimbledon, doing my television work, being able to support through my foundation, I would I would sign on the bottom line. So yeah, I feel very fortunate that again, I don't have a real job. All the things are hobbies. I'm passionate about them, and long may that continue.
Well, you said sign on the dotted line, but the last time you said that, you far exceeded those expectations. But it's been a huge honor to have you on. I feel like I've learned way more than I thought I would. I mean, those lessons are incredible, and I think transcend even sport itself. I'm very interested to see what you're up to next. You've had a phenomenal career, and I'm sure many people will realize that it's truly about maximizing your potential rather than the output. But your output was still absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for joining me. And
Pleasure, Harvey. And it's been great getting to know you and your family. Best of luck. I know you're off to Duke tomorrow, but keep in touch. I'm much more interested in your journey and seeing what you get up to over the next year, 5 years, 10 years. So as I said, keep in touch, and I hope our paths continue to cross.